guys, I want to talk to you just a bit about first aid, considerations that you may or may not have made for your own preparation. I always group first aid into pretty big categories. The first one that I always talk about is catastrophic. If you don't do something, you or somebody else is going to die. Then I talk about what I consider boo-boo level things. Not life-threatening, but not fun. There are some other considerations that I want to talk about as well, but let's talk about catastrophic. When it comes to catastrophic, you're talking about somebody's bleeding really, really badly. Not like pressure's going to stop it, or a band-aid, or even a bandage. Like if we don't stop that bleeding, then somebody's going to die in a few minutes. When it comes to that, there's a few things that you want to have on hand. A tourniquet, and I'll talk more about tourniquets in just a second, very quickly. Hemostatic gauze, some things you cannot tourniquet. Chest seals are important. If air is entering into your torso through some other mechanism besides your mouth or your nose, that's a bad day, and that could cause real problems. An H bandage, or sometimes what's called an Israeli bandage, is something for not tourniquet level of injury, but substantive level of injury, and those usually pack pretty small as well. In addition, you may want a nasopharyngeal airway. Nitrile gloves you should always have with you, and it's helpful to have shears. The whole reason for shears is that when there's clothing in the way, sometimes it's very hard to tell what the mechanism of injury was. I talked to a doctor, and he said that one of the problems they see in the ER when somebody comes in with a tourniquet is that sometimes it's misapplied. And by misapplied, I mean it is below where the injury occurred, because the people who placed the tourniquet did not take enough time to find out where that actual injury occurred. Anytime you're dealing with a limb, arm, or leg, and you apply a tourniquet, that tourniquet has to be above where the injury was. It sounds obvious, but sometimes people neglect that. When there's any doubt, you can put it up as high as it'll go on that limb. Doing that helps you also stop the blood flow, because instead of compressing the artery or arteries against two bones, which you get in the lower portion of a limb, you're only compressing it against one bone. So easier to stop that bleeding. A note about gloves before I go any further. Cool tactical gloves like the black nitriles. They look awesome, but in terms of trying to find blood or a bleed on somebody, they're not helpful, because typically you cannot see blood. So a lighter colored nitrile glove, while it's less tactical, may help you save somebody's life much more readily. When it comes to the tourniquet itself, if that tourniquet is not on a list of approved tourniquets from the Council of Tactical Combat Casualty Care, then you should not use it. I'm not going to go into all the tourniquets out there. I will link to at least one of the studies so you can make up your own mind. Whatever tourniquet you choose, I recommend that you train with it so that you're comfortable with it. That's pretty much it for the catastrophic stuff. Often people, it comes up, what about a chest start? I can decompress somebody if they're getting a sucking chest wound, or air has gone into their torso and it's causing their lungs to compress. Unless you have a substantive amount of training, I think that something like that is a bad idea. So for that reason alone, I typically don't recommend that people carry those. If you have that level of training experience, then that's awesome. Carry it, certainly do that. But if you have this stuff with you, then you've got a pretty good leg up on trying to stabilize somebody so that they do not die in your care before you can transfer them to somebody who knows that they're doing better, paramedics, EMTs, hospital, or ER, obviously. But that aside, if you aren't dealing with something like this, oh, actually, before I forget, these things are good in a car, but if you work in a capacity where you might end up heavily injured and might need this stuff, having to run back to your car while you're bleeding out is a bad day. So I want to talk about actually having that stuff on you, but I'll talk about that just a little bit more in a second. Let's talk about the boo-boo stuff. If you get banged up and you need some minor medical care, then it's good to have a first aid kit with you. When it comes to first aid kits, you can make your own, right? You can go to one of the local drugstores. throw a bunch of band-aids, athletic tape, everything else into a kit, or you can buy one that's pre-made. I don't no judgment on either. Some people really want to curate their own stuff. No matter what you have, I recommend duct tape, some sort of glue, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. Obviously, athletic tape. I really recommend having whatever sort of painkiller you like to take. Like if you take Advil when stuff hurts, I recommend that. Having Benadryl is a really good idea in case you have an allergic reaction, and Imodium just in case the worst happens and you aren't able to get someplace where you can safely take comfort of that or take control of that. Any medication that you require, if you have prescriptions that are important, you should probably have a small stash of that with you at all times. If you have any life-threatening allergies, you should have an EpiPen with you at all times. And if you wear any sort of corrective lens, glasses, or contacts, a spare set of those with you is not a bad idea either. Usually we're talking about at this point a go bag, like what you're keeping in your car, or at your residence or at your desk at work. But those are important considerations. Lastly, I did want to talk briefly about what I call the in-between. I'm not talking about societal collapse because that could certainly happen. But I will tell you right now, in the age of the unspecified virus of unknown origin, I stole that from Critical Drinker, by the way. He's funny on YouTube, recommend him. But in this age that we're currently experiencing, wait times at emergency rooms are increased. Staffing is down. No matter what your thought or opinion on our current situation when it comes to the pandemic, there are some things that I think you need to have alternative considerations for. I can't even go into that because it could literally be like a days-long class. Although there's somebody I know who teaches something along those lines. I'll mention him at the end. But a story for you. Probably about a year ago, I and my wife were on a trip, and we had rented a place. She cut her finger. Not so bad that it was spurting blood. It was an arterial, but it was a pretty long slice, and it was bleeding pretty good, and wouldn't stop just from direct pressure. So I looked at it and said, "Hey, I think you need stitches." And under much protest, we went to the emergency room. And at the emergency room, she bled all over the emergency room. They said, "Oh yeah, you totally need stitches." And then she sat there for about 4 hours. And finally, when a doctor saw her, he said, "No, you don't need stitches." And he made fun of her, wrapped her finger up, looked like an exclamation point, and threw her out. Knowing what I know now in hindsight, I probably would have preferred to just glue it or bandage it myself, which is why one of the things I did want to mention, you could use crazy glue. Some people say don't, but in a pinch, it'll work to close wounds. But there's a product that 3M makes called Dermabond, and you can get the veterinary version of it called Vet Bond. And I'll tell you now that if I or my spouse or anybody in my party gets a cut sufficient for stitches but not for any further intervention, I personally, I'm not saying you should, but I will probably just glue them up and move on. Obviously, you can use steri strips. There's a bunch of different ways to close a wound, but I like glue because it tends to stay longer. With the surgical strips, the little strips, they don't seem to stay planted anywhere near as long as I would prefer. Things that I recommend you have with you. You can get a purpose-built trauma kit with a tourniquet and those other items that I mentioned. And they make them in all different sizes. This is just one I keep in the center console of my car. If you wear something that looks like this around your waist for work, then you can get something that goes like this on your belt. And once again, all the major stuff is in here. You can also get a tourniquet holder for the front of your holster, and it doesn't seem to get in the way of anything because I've been wearing this for about 3 years now with no issue. So that is a really good way to keep some things close at hand with you in case something bad happens. If you're talking about first aid kits, like something that's boo-boo size, Imminent Threat Solutions offers all kinds of purpose-built things. I like them because they're very eclectic. Like they got everything from lockpicks to medical stuff. So this is one of their kits, and this also I keep in the car. It's just got gauze, pads, Band-Aids, CPR, face shield, some meds, some burn gel, but this is for the less catastrophic stuff. And lastly, I always keep a bag of meds and things in my go bag to include hand sanitizer, ibuprofen, hand wipes, bug repellent, sunscreen, allergy meds, Imodium, and wet wipes, because they have hundreds of uses. So I don't want to go in deep into go bag type issues or concerns. I could do something like that at some other time, but at a minimum, this is something that I think everybody should be considering when it comes to their lives. When it comes to guys who have either been in the military or doing SWAT work or police, most of them I know have applied way more tourniquets than they've shot bad guys. That tells me that you should probably be prepared to handle medical things. Not your only concern, but it's definitely a concern for you, your family. If you come across a car wreck where people are injured, if you are capable of helping them, this is something that I think you should probably have in your mind. So I'll stop there. I do want to talk about some suppliers. Be very wary of where you get your medical gear from, especially tourniquets. Buying things on Amazon is the worst idea. Most of the things on there are cheap Chinese knockoffs. They will not work. They will break. And when it comes to trying to save your life, this is something where I think you should probably just kind of saddle up and realize you're going to have to pay full price. Suppliers that sell legitimate actual things: North American Rescue, once again, links will be in the description, Dark Angel Medical, TACMed Solutions, and Imminent Threat Solutions. Those are the four suppliers, I'm sorry, that I order most of my things from. Like I said, for the minor stuff, obviously you can supply from your local drugstore, but when it comes to some of the more specific things, I always end up ordering them, and that's where I order them from. Now, one last thing that I neglect to mention: probably nobody needs training to use a Band-Aid. But when it comes to things like these, training is a good idea. There are three that I'll mention off the top of my head that I recommend. One of them, Iron Forge Consulting. They are local in Virginia. Jonathan Aldridge runs that, paramedic EMT, and I recommend him. Dark Angel Medical. They are somewhere out west, but they travel. They're all over the United States. You can get them to come to you, and his classes are excellent. Lastly, Greg Ellifritz, based in Ohio, but he travels all over. I know he's doing a tactical medical and systems collapse medical class in Springfield, Virginia in March. Once again, like I said, I'll link to his things. But I recommend those guys. I know they do legit work. It's like anything else when it comes to training: buyer beware. Be careful of who you take your training from and what sort of advice they give you. But that's all that I've got. If there's anything that I forgot or you think that I should have added to this, please let me know. This is a super fast overview, and certainly not a class on anything. It's just like a gear, like what you should probably have with you. So as always, check out the links. Thanks for your time. If you enjoyed this video, if you would please like, subscribe, share with some friends, I would really appreciate it. Thanks, guys.